One is that people feel a sense of betrayal, and they feel that betrayal so strongly that they're willing to use those words because they don't feel that this was what they elected Labour for.
Claire, thank you for joining us as we sort of chart this political obituary, as it were, of Keir Starmer. Can we perhaps begin about your history with the man? Tell us what it was like working under him and what you did for him.
So I joined Keir Starmer's team as Director of Policy when he was first elected leader of the Labour Party in April 2020. And at that time, the Labour Party had suffered our fourth election defeat. We were like 26 points behind the Conservatives at the time in the polls. And nobody really thought that Keir would be able to turn around Labour's fortunes within just one term. But that is what he set out to do. So he really tackled the party's difficulties that we had at the time with the problem of left-wing extremism, really, and anti-Semitism. We weren't seen as credible to many voters, particularly on the economy. And Keir really led the party in a very strong direction. So our role then was really to reposition the party as being credible and worthy of government again, but also to start to chart a policy programme that would stand for change for the people of Britain. And that's what he did. And I then left the team in the end of 2020 to go and do a new role on the global centre-left. But my work for Keir really kind of continued in that what he then did was then take the party through to a general election, win a historic landslide in July 2024. But obviously it's been a different story since Labour got into government.
And so this platform, these policies, while you're working under the man, what's striking you about him? Did you know him previously? Was he what you expected when you guys became closer? Can you explain that for us?
Keir was someone who was absolutely determined to turn around the perceptions and reality of the Labour Party. So he did things that were not popular in the party. He had to face down quite a lot of internal pressures, but he's someone who's driven by a really moral sense of what's right and wrong. And so I loved working for him because I think he had a lot of integrity and he wasn't afraid of taking the hard path if it was the right thing to do. What
happened when he came into government in this landslide, really, the greatest victory since Blair, apart from any other Labor victory? And tell us about his first speech. It was talking about those difficult challenges.
Yeah, and the victory was obviously a victory for the Labour Party, but the reality is, of course, the Conservative Party was so unpopular by then that Labour got a much bigger majority than, frankly, we expected to get, because people had just said we've had 14 years of the Conservatives, they've left the country in a worse state. So Keir's pitch to the nation on the steps of Downing Street when he won that election was really a message of national unity, and it was an end to the chaos of the Conservatives, and it was a coming together. And he started to message about the difficulties the country faced, but it was quite hopeful. That changed when he then made a speech about the country's public finances. And ever since then, the mood of the country really didn't feel like it was being lifted or directed. And that has been quite hard to recover from.
So let's talk about that. The time in the sun was quite brief. Can you go into a bit more about how that changed? And then it seemed like once he started not slipping up, but experiencing more challenging, turbulent times, he was never really able to recover.
So he made that speech on the steps of Downing Street when he became Prime Minister that set out this hopeful direction, made some really strong appointments, and then also represented Britain on the world stage. And it felt like the nation's mood had somewhat lifted. But then when we started to talk about the country's public finances, the mood turned somewhat more downbeat. But really, I think the problem was not the candour that he showed, because he did show candour, was that there wasn't really a clear vision or direction that was then set out. So there wasn't really a message of, we're in difficult times now, we are going to have to make sacrifices in the form of tax and spending, but this is in service of a greater vision that we can get behind. So really, people started to lose some confidence in the government. The mood amongst business started to deteriorate. And then one of the major things that Labour did first off was to say, well, we're going to cut the winter fuel allowance, which in the UK is a benefit that all pensioners get. And there's a good case for why wealthy pensioners don't need it, but it really was set at a level that only the poorest pensioners would still get it. And people just thought, this isn't what we voted a Labour government in for. And then there were a number of missteps that it just felt that the message of change and of strength and of unity that had got Labour elected wasn't really being followed through in power, and actually was just too difficult to recover from.
Another huge challenge that happened to not only Keir Starmer but every Western leader they had to grapple with was the Israel conflict with Hamas in Gaza and in Israel proper itself. How did he manage to navigate that, particularly having his quite accomplished background as an international human rights lawyer? And then do you think that the public had certain expectations of him that he lived up to, or did he fall short there?
The Gaza conflict was certainly really challenging in terms of how international leaders dealt with that, and it was one of the factors that has contributed, but I wouldn't say it was the main factor. Particularly after the 7th of October, where there was worldwide support for Israelis after the attack that they experienced, there was then the retaliation action from Israel, and Keir Starmer gave an interview where it sounded as though he was almost sort of sanctioning the withholding of humanitarian assistance. Now, clearly that was a mistake and it should have been labelled as such very quickly, but he wasn't very fast in correcting that on the record, and it really contributed to a view that actually he wasn't empathetic to some of the problems that people would say they had with the actions of the Israeli government. But also we have a lot of support over here for the Palestinian cause. And so therefore I wouldn't say it was this one thing that changed it for him with some of those communities, but it certainly didn't feel like the government was adept enough at correcting that.
We spoke to some people in Keir Starmer's electorate today. One of the few themes that came about was liar. Is that a categorisation that you subscribe to?
It's strong words, really, and I think that it doesn't sound fair because, like, we had someone who actually lied in Parliament, the previous Prime Minister, about whether there were parties going on. But I think it tells you a couple of things. One is that people feel a sense of betrayal, and they feel that betrayal so strongly that they're willing to use those words because they don't feel that this was what they elected Labour for. And it also tells you that the regard that politicians are held in is very low. And it's making this distance between the public and politicians, I think, potentially quite dangerous, and it's leaving us open to the extremes on both sides, which are really saying, you know, we're your friends, we're really men of the people primarily, we're here for you, and actually telling people things that aren't necessarily true, but are not attracting people to the mainstream parties anymore.
You're basically taking me to my next question, but Keir Starmer's ousting doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because there is a resurgent reform, extreme right party taking place and really sweeping across the country. How instrumental do you think Nigel Farage and that party was to the Prime Minister's downfall?
So Reform UK are a new party in a new form, but they have some old politicians. So they have Nigel Farage, who's well known in Britain and around the world, and we also have a number of former Tories, and they've been absolutely well poised at the right time to benefit from the disaffection with Labour, and the Conservatives aren't really yet rehabilitated amongst the public to win the support they could get from Labour's decline in popularity. So we now have Reform topping the polls. It does feel as though their sheen has come off of late, so they aren't doing quite as well as they were. They're not actually winning some of the elections. So people in an opinion poll will say, yes, I'll vote for Reform, but they're not actually showing it always at the ballot box. But there is no complacency. Labour are unpopular in government. They've just ousted a Prime Minister, and we don't know what quite is going to be the shape of the new Andy Burnham government. The Conservatives are nowhere near power at this point, and we have Reform, which is an untested proposition, but it means that they can say what the voters want them to say.
If you were to put it briefly, in a nutshell, effectively, what sort of fatal flaw would you put Keir Starmer's downfall to?
I think it has been his inability to really tell the country a story about where we're headed and how we are going to get there.
That takes me to the incoming Prime Minister here in Britain, who seems an expert, extremely adept at telling stories. Tell us about Andy Burnham. Does he possess that vital ingredient that Keir Starmer was missing?
So Andy Burnham is a really interesting proposition. He's got both style and substance. So he's got substance because he was Mayor of Manchester, our fastest growing city region. He's also got style. He's just got a natural ability to connect with people. He clearly likes people and is on social media a lot. And that isn't the only thing you need to do in these days, but it does show that he's not afraid of the voters. Like he, has shots of him running and his playlists, and he's got a natural ability to connect with people and tell us where we're going and what they can expect from him. The difficulty we have is that you can't just elect somebody new, or in our case not elect, but just appoint somebody new and have them completely turn around the problems of the country. So I think it will be on Andy's shoulders about what kind of leader is he? Is he someone who can mobilise people behind him? Because just changing the leader won't just fix things.
There have been many parallels drawn between the Australian Labor Party and the British Labor Party, between Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer. Do you think that there are fair comparisons there? And if they exist, which ones would you point to?
There are some parallels between the Australian Labor Party and the British Labor Party. We've both got leaders who are men of a certain stature, who have had to really emphasise their real kind of ordinary working class roots in order to relate. They're also governing parties who are sometimes got lots of ideas of what they want to do, but really need to focus. And actually the British Labour Party learnt a lot from the Australians about how to win in terms of focusing their campaigning. But of course, we hope that Albanese doesn't go the same way as Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer perhaps didn't learn the lesson that the Australians did, which is that you really need to refocus, particularly in the run-up to re-election, otherwise you're not going to win people's support again.
He had a very difficult time in office. If you were to catalogue perhaps his triumphs, victories, high points, how would you list them?
Small broke crossings, which has been a big issue, have actually come down overall. You can now get a doctor's appointment much more quickly than you used to. And actually the economy has started to grow. It's been in historic terms, it's quite weak, but comparatively not so bad, and inflation is under control. So these are like big things. They're like the three priorities that people would have had. But people just haven't felt that way on the ground.
How would you list his triumphs of his premiership?
So I think Keir Starmer should be remembered, and I think he will be remembered actually much more favourably than the kind of immediate commentary around his departure. He will be remembered as one of only two Labour leaders in the last 50 years who've taken us from opposition into government, the other one of course being Tony Blair. He'll be remembered of having turned around the Labour Party's fortunes and getting us back in. I think he'll be remembered for some of his achievements that we will see in the time to come, so stabilising the economy, getting the health service back on its feet, and actually starting to make some of the inroads to controlling our borders in a way that resonates with people.
And then what are perhaps the challenges that he leaves behind for his successor in Andy Burnham?
The challenges are the challenges as they always were, which is the state of the public finances and particularly rising security threats at home and abroad. And the two of those coming together is really what is at the kind of nub of the problem. We've got major challenges over having an ageing population, having quite a high welfare bill. But the answers to that are not easy. If you start to take some of that support away, you just cause more problems and more costs in the long run. So having a really well-crafted approach to some of that, and perhaps a more honest conversation with the public about what we can really expect from the state and what we're prepared to do for ourselves too.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you think there are any lessons to be learned from Australian politics that perhaps Burnham can borrow when he comes in?
What's won has been an approach which has really prioritised the interests of ordinary people above the interests of the party or the different stakeholder groups. And when the Labour Party in Britain and in Australia have got that right, then we've been on a winning ticket. Where we've lost touch with people, we've moved away from them, then we start to lose support. And it's really refinding that connection that Andy Burnham's got to do now.
What's the key thing that Burnham should do when he becomes Prime Minister that will allow him to be successful?
Level with the public about the state of the country's finances, but tell us what your plan is and where you're planning to take the country and how they could be part of that change.